The opinions you hear on Your Mountain from individual hosts or guests do not necessarily represent those of Your Mountain, our sponsors, or other entities we're affiliated with professionally or otherwise. You've waited long enough. Go listen to the show.
There are millions of acres of opportunity out there. They belong to you. Every day, decisions are being made that affect your land, your water, your wildlife. You should know about them. This is Your Mountain.
Hey everybody, and welcome back for another episode of the Your Mountain podcast. As always, I'm your host David Wilms, and as always, Nephi Cole is distracted doing something else when I'm trying to introduce him as the co-host of the Your Mountain podcast. Nephi?
Dave, I had to wait for you while you rudely interrupted our phone call for Jordan, who, thanks a lot, Jordan, left me sitting here. So then I had to do arts and crafts, and so I'm currently refilling a Armageddon Game Changer bag with ultralight fill. So my office, like my desk, everything is like literally covered in these styrofoam, these tiny styrofoam beads. Like they're everywhere. But the good news is this shooting bag's going to be really light.
Because you need another shooting bag, I'm sure.
Well, the old one was heavy, and a lot of animals died thanks to that old game, this bag. But you didn't want to pack it very far, and so I'm getting old, Dave, and in my old age, I want things to be lighter, always lighter. And so,
man, I got to tell you something before we jump into this.
That's good.
We have, I'm just prefacing this just a little bit with, I'm gonna make fun of you. So I'm just bracing you for this right out of the bat. But you don't even know what I'm gonna make fun of you for yet.
Well, I'm ready. I'm ready.
So here it comes. We have received like more
emails
so
on
many
Bro
emails. So many emails.
I knew we would. Finally, someone.
So many emails.
We've hit on a subject that people care about. Oh, that's great.
We have we got very little feedback on the actual substance of our last podcast about the reconciliation process and land disposal and that sort of stuff. But we happened to get a lot of comments about how you were completely wrong in your love of bro country, Nephi. And I will tell you
love
this,
bro country, not me.
One of my favorite comments, and I'll qualify this one with it wasn't through an email. This was a phone call. I will not say who the phone call came from. But one of my favorite comments was that Nephi probably sleeps in bedazzled underwear. I thought that was pretty good. You seem to have no reaction to it at all.
That's pretty funny.
And you're sitting there wondering, how did that person know? How did that person know?
It's Ryan
that
Bronson.
I sleep in bedazzled underwear.
It's Bronson.
It was not Bronson.
Bronson is weird.
But it could have been anybody.
Weird
because
fetishes.
As it turns out, it seems like people were pretty passionate about this topic.
You know what's funny is, you lined me up to do another podcast. If you remember this,
no.
Yeah, you lined me up to do another podcast with a fan from Colorado. I did a podcast, and
I know who you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, he was on the opposite side of the coin. He said I was right. That's hilarious. He's the only one that so you have to respond to everything because I'm not going to look at the email. So he just texted me directly. So that's how I knew. So for all I know, you could be filtering all of this. You could be making up your own reality, gaslighting me, Dave.
I am not. I can tell you. I can tell you definitively. We received
and you're
exactly one. We got one email that appreciated your perspective. And somehow thought, bro country didn't make your ears bleed. I mean,
what did you find out about the rap intro?
I did get some feedback on the rap intro. There were
Why don't you tell me the truth about what it was instead of making stuff up like you have before?
I'm just being selective about comments.
I know. I want you to be honest. I want you to give me
I'm trying to come up with my favorite comments on each of these. And maybe my favorite comment on the rap piece of it was somebody that said, yes, like pro rap intro, so long as it's Nephi rapping. So,
all right. Well,
so there you go.
Looks like we're not going to get a rap intro.
That's the homework on that.
Yeah. Well, it was a good thought.
I thought that was fun. Anyway, I mean, you still have time to get your votes in if you want to weigh in.
Yeah, since there is no
on the bro country, non-bro country.
Technically, piece. There is no timestamp on any of this since none of it matters. So yeah, you've still got time to put your, whatever that comment might be to vote in on. And I'm not sure where we're going after the vote, but.
Oh, I mean, it's just for me to be able to lord it over you forever.
I got to tell you,
that's
Dave,
the only reason.
This thing weighs the same as a helium balloon.
All right. That looks all right. All right, I'm gonna get us.
Shoot, but I just shot styrofoam beans all over my office again.
Nicely done. Well, why don't you wait and pick those up later, and we can actually do. Yeah,
let's do a podcast now that Meat Eater's done doing their homework.
All right,
we can get to
perfect.
We can talk about it.
Yeah. So remember last week. Like, this is a weird thing. First of all, remember last week when we released a podcast? That's a sentence I haven't said in a long time.
Yeah.
where we've recorded multiple podcasts in consecutive weeks here. We released a podcast yesterday that was telling folks about this reconciliation. We were telling you all about the reconciliation process that was starting and kind of outlining what that was and what to expect and how public lands could potentially fit into that. And a weird thing happened, right? So we talked about, go back and listen to it if you haven't, but my recollection is we were talking about if public lands became part of the reconciliation process, meaning selling public lands and using the proceeds to help pay down the national debt or to help pay for the tax cut proposal, that the lands that would be identified for sale would probably be those that were already identified as suitable for disposal under a resource management plan. And we walked you through the resource management plan process and how lands are identified for sale and how that all happens. We released that episode last week, and then I felt like, oh man, we spent all that time and it was all for naught, because late last week, Congress, or the House Natural Resources Committee, released its proposed reconciliation bill, and there were no public lands in it for sale.
Yep.
Or disposal of any kind. And we did this collective sigh, exhale of, after would they, wouldn't they, would they, wouldn't they, a lot of folks talking, they were hearing these conversations that some lands might be included, and then they weren't. And then something really bizarre happened. So that happened late last week. And then I thought, we did this whole podcast and maybe none of that matters anymore because none of those lands were included. But that's fine. Didn't want them to be included. Well, I'm time stamping this so you know where we are. We're on, right now it's Wednesday, May 7th. And in the middle of the night, sometime between May 6th and May 7th, depending on which time zone you were in, the House Natural Resources Committee was going through what's called a markup, where they propose amendments to this reconciliation bill. And it can be a long process because any member of the committee can submit any number of amendments, and there's a process to go through, and then there's a vote on the amendments, and they either move forward or they die, right? And at the literal 11th hour, as in perhaps
11 o'clock,
11 o'clock at night, or sometime even later than that, I don't know the exact time, a couple of representatives, one from Utah, Representative Malloy, and one from Nevada, Representative Amadei. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that name correctly. They introduced an amendment that that we'll get into a little bit of detail, but at the very, very highest level, creates a path and a timeline for selling or otherwise disposing of thousands of acres of public lands, both Bureau of Land Management and Forest Service lands in Nevada and Utah. And that amendment, when it was proposed and put up for a vote, one Republican representative voted no. Representative Hurd from Colorado. Everybody else voted yes. The amendment passed, and ultimately the reconciliation bill passed out of committee after markup and now goes to the full House. There are obviously, this is a big reconciliation package. There will be bills coming out of all kinds of committees on the House side, and they all have to be combined, and then they have to be voted on by the House. And then you have a Senate separate companion bill or standalone bill of its own, or a bunch of other bills, who knows. They have to be passed. Then you have the conference committees meeting and reconciling differences between the bills. Like, there's a lot of process to go before this bill becomes law. But there are some important things that I think are worth talking about in this. So I just wanted to tee that up really quick. That's what happened. And now we can get into a little bit of the nitty gritty, Nephi. If you wanted, I've been talking a lot. I can kick it to you.
Do you want to know a fascinating fact about the representative from Utah?
Sure.
Have you ever heard of a guy named Cliven Bundy?
Yes, I have. I don't know exactly what you're going to say.
Yeah, they're related. Did you know that?
Yeah. Isn't he her uncle?
Yeah, I think so. I think Ammon Bundy's her cousin, if that's... How's that for craziness? I mean, honestly, you can't make this up. Thank you, Utah, for giving us something new. I mean, because I watched 1883 and 1923, and like I'm just waiting for the next season of all this stuff, and Utah just gives it to you straight up, in real life. Unbelievable.
Should we talk about some of what's in this thing?
Yeah, we should. It's so, I don't even know where to start other than to say, we talked about this in previous episodes, and we've talked about kind of theories and what could be happening, what might not. I think you'll remember some of our, it's probably been almost a year ago when we started talking about the Utah's lawsuit in front of the Supreme Court. And in that lawsuit, we said that the concern was not the lawsuit itself, that the lawsuit was simply a leverage activity. The lawsuit was something to basically create some power, some opportunity, some scuttlebutt to then have a bright, shiny object that allows you to leverage legislative action. And I think this qualifies as legislative action. This qualifies as exactly that. This is what we were talking about. This was our concern.
Yeah. And then fast forward, and just to last week's episode, we said that the most likely, if land disposition was part of a reconciliation package, the most likely avenue for including acreage would be to say somebody identifies lands that have already been, or somebody includes lands that have already been identified as subject or suitable for disposal under an existing resource management plan. So guess what this resolution does?
I think I know. I don't need to guess.
Not this resolution, this amendment.
Yes. Yeah. It identifies lands that are under existing, protocols, have been identified as suitable for disposal in Nevada and Utah, and proposes through congressional action to basically, there's some discussion on this, but from what I've seen, they're saying, well, we're not going around FLTMA, we're fast tracking, so that's some of the language I've seen. And I haven't seen that much language. I've heard a lot of discussion. I haven't seen a lot of language.
Yeah. So we're not going to be able to give the deep dive that we normally give on some of this stuff. So this is a little bit high level, and then we can go to some other topics too. But what this effectively does is exactly what you said, Nephi. The idea is to accelerate the FLTMA process, Federal Land Policy Management Act process. The process we talked about on our last episode, like how do you identify lands in the resource management process, planning process? Then how do you take those acres and nominate something for potential disposal? And how do you go through the appraisal process and the public involvement process and everything that you have to do, the EA, like all the things that you have to do before actually selling these lands in a competitive bid process, right? So what this amendment that was adopted does, so now not an amendment anymore, what the reconciliation bill that was approved by the House Natural Resources Committee does is it puts a date certain by which these parcels must be offered for sale. Okay? It says by, for example, in Clark County, no later than 2 years after the date of enactment of this title, the Secretary of Interior has to identify and offer for sale all right, title, and interest in the United States in and to federal land located in Clark County that has been identified as suitable for disposal in the Las Vegas Resource Management Plan. That's just an example of one. There are a number of other resource management plans mentioned, but the idea is by a date certain, and that's 2 years, all of the parcels identified as suitable for sale have to be offered for sale. Okay. Now, I saw some talk about this, that this land would be used for affordable housing. Okay. Well,
it depends, right?
Yeah, it's sort of
because
like,
I mean, here's the funny thing. Like some of these areas are, there are apples and oranges in this proposal. So I think
right now I'm on Clark County. I think you were going to jump to someplace like to Pershing County.
County, yeah.
Let's do that in a minute. Like, because I'm on the Clark County piece right now.
Okay.
But so all I wanted to say is like in that Clark County piece, they're identifying the Las Vegas land use plan and saying that in 2 years you have to sell it. Follow FLIPMA, but with this hard stop on the back end. And oh, by the way, in FLIPMA, the process requires or allows you to identify acres that are suitable for disposal. It does not mandate that you actually sell them. So what this law does or would do if it becomes law, what this bill does is it would actually mandate that you offer to sell everything that's been identified as suitable. That's different than what FLIPMA requires already. And then the affordable housing piece, it doesn't mandate the use for affordable housing. It allows upon the request of Clark County, then there are certain lands that could be offered at less than fair market value for affordable housing. So it starts from the proposition of it's being sold at auction at or above fair market value unless a request comes in to sell certain parcels for less than fair market value. And that makes sense because one of the things the sponsor said is that this would generate, these lands being sold would generate billions with a B as in boy, of dollars to the federal treasury if these are sold. Right. So like you're not going to generate billions of dollars if you're disposing of lands for affordable housing. That's just a reality. We talked about that last week, although you and I had some sort of disagreement about whether the home value or the land value was, building the home was more expensive than buying the land. And I don't want to revisit that, Nephi, but I still argue that in many parts of the country with housing shortages, it's the land price is the more expensive part. Just doubling down on that.
You're out of your mind.
Anyway, so here's the last thing I wanted to say just on a general level before we go to the Pershing County piece, because I think that's an interesting one too. Remember last week we made this comment, and remember this piece. We told you about the Federal Land Transaction Facilitation Act and the Federal Land Disposal Account. And if you remember what that is, the Federal Land Transaction Facilitation Act is the law that says if the Bureau of Land Management sells a parcel of land pursuant to FLIPA, so they sell it, the proceeds from that sale go into this federal land disposal account, and under the Federal Land Transaction Facilitation Act, that money is used to help buy high priority conservation lands like in holdings or in holdings in national parks or wilderness areas or whatever, or acquire easements to create access. But at the end of the day, the account was set up to say, if we're going to sell lands that have low ecological value and low value to the public for access and use and are more expensive to manage, if we're going to sell those, and there are lands to sell, if we're going to do that, that money has to go back into improving our public lands. What this bill does is it works around that process and says any of the money that's generated by selling these tens of thousands of acres of public lands must be deposited into the general treasury, not into the federal land disposal account. So it does not necessarily go back to benefit these public lands. It goes into the general fund. That's a pretty big difference too. Pretty big change.
So a lot of these lands are front country type recreational areas. So what do I mean by that as opposed to backcountry? Well, these are places that, they're not places necessarily that we're going to do multi-day hunts. They're places that we're going to check out in the day. They're places that you're just going to be easy access, of course, to urban areas, which is why they are areas that are being considered because they are close to municipalities. They're easy to get to. It's actually one of the things that I think about is well, maybe this isn't a spot you're going to go hunt for a trophy mule deer, but it might be where you go to sight in your rifle. There are a lot of these places where people go do recreational shooting and those types of things where this is going to, potentially apply to some of these front country areas. So in Clark County, you see that it's kind of around Las Vegas, and not going to weigh in exclusively on that. But again, there are apples and oranges in this proposal. So let's talk about Pershing County, right? So that's an area that has checkerboard. And the explanation of that checkerboard area is exactly like the explanation of a checkerboard area in some place like Wyoming. It's checkerboard because of railroad activity. And so they're talking about this area as suitable for disposals, like, identifying checkerboard and how they could, get rid of that checkerboard. And there's some unique things there. So in the past, maybe we would have said, well, checkerboard is inaccessible. With some of the recent discussions about, changes in how people are going to look at trespassing on checkerboard. Well, I'm not sure that's really the case anymore. I'm not sure that you need to look at disposal and consolidation to be able to access or have public access to that checkerboard. So that's an interesting thing. Again, you look at these things and BLM land around Las Vegas and BLM land in Pershing County, which, that's, you can go look up the county. You're talking about entirely different things. One of these things is not like the other. And if you paint them with a broad brush, you're going to make some bad assumptions, about these lands and whether that or not they should be on the table or not. And we're just talking about, Las Vegas. A number that I'd heard thrown around about this, and maybe you've heard this, Dave, is somebody said, well, we might only be talking about 11,000 acres. Have you heard that?
I've seen some reporting on that. I've seen this 11,000 acre number.
And I haven't seen the source to definitively say if that's right or not. But, when you're talking about, billions of dollars of revenue for the federal government, here's what I would say. If you looked at 11,000 acres, and so let's just use 11,000 acres, and you sold 11,000 acres for $100K per acre, well, that's $1 billion. That you can get to that number if it's worth $100,000 an acre. And I can tell you that a parcel that's in Grand Teton National Park, it might have high value like that. A section of BLM in the middle of Nevada simply doesn't have that kind of value.
Yeah. Now, some of it around Las Vegas might have really high value.
It might.
Yeah.
And so again, that's where these things, that one of these things is not like the other. Here's the other point I want to make about that. And we talked about this on the last episode. Whether or not you think this is a good idea or not, here's the thing that I think everybody needs to keep in mind. So last year, there was a tax on the use of arms and ammunition called Pittman-Robertson that results in $1 billion a year, $1.1 billion 2 years ago, from the sale of firearms and ammunition that goes to conservation every year. And that's roughly what it is every year. Sportsmen are generating roughly $1 billion every year that can be used for conservation. So let's just assume that you sold 10,000 acres at $100,000 an acre. That's what you would generate in a single year. The same amount of money that sportsmen generate every year. Well, what's the difference? This is
That's a non-renewable resource.
That's exactly right. It's never happening again. So sportsmen, they're conservation dollars that are coming from sporting, right? From using those lands, from going out and doing recreational hunting, recreational shooting. That's $1 billion a year that's renewable and comes every year. Now think about this, and this is the question. This is the argument. What happens if we do this? What happens if we head down the road of disposal of the lands? Well, if our hunting heritage, if our shooting heritage is tied to those public lands and we lose that, what's the opportunity cost of losing those lands? What's the opportunity cost of not being able to do that anymore? And so that's the difference. And that's one of the reasons why these special places need to be preserved. That's why we need to have access to not just backcountry. And, we talk about backcountry a lot, and there's people that have great concerns. And of course, if somebody lose their mind if we're selling a piece of the Bob Marshall, right, to, put a lodge there. But what about front country? We've talked about that before. Dave and I have an organization we call it Front Country Hunters and Anglers. If you'd like to be a member, you can send a check to Your Mountain Podcast, and we will get you a Front Country Hunters and Anglers t-shirt. But in reality, more people utilize front country for these things than utilize backcountry. They utilize places where they can get in a pickup and they can drive there, and they can get out of the truck, and in a few minutes, they can be hunting. So those public lands are just as important, and I would argue maybe more so, than the stuff that's really hard to get to. And you can't lose sight when you look at these opportunities and you look at what people are considering for disposal. You can't just keep parcels of land for quote unquote public lands that are wilderness in the middle of nowhere. Those spots are really cool for a once in a lifetime hunt or a once a year type thing. But in terms of the culture of hunting and shooting, like stuff that's close to town is really important.
And I'm going to take a slightly different approach because I agree with you on that. But I'm also going to take a slightly different approach, focusing on this bill, this amendment that went into this bill. And I think my underlying concern with it. I suspect that with some of these parcels, heck, maybe with a lot of these parcels, I know some of them are around the St. George, Utah area. Some are around Las Vegas. There might be some around Reno. There might be some of these parcels that you cannot recreationally shoot on because your backstop would be somebody's, back fence, right? Because it's surrounded by other development. They might be parcels that are largely industrialized that really don't have a ton of use for the public. Not a lot of opportunity to hike or bike or camp or hunt or shoot or do anything. Right? There might be parcels that it 100% makes sense to sell, right? Because I'm not in this camp of saying there are no parcels that should be sold. Right? There very well could be. And some of these, maybe even a lot of them, fall into that category. Here's my problem. We have a process for that. Like, that's what FLIPMA does. Like, it lets you go through the planning process, identify acres, and then be able to try and nominate those acres and work with the Bureau of Land Management on selling those parcels. And what happened in this amendment process is you kind of undercut that. Congress undercut that. They cut the public out largely. When you mandate that all these acres be offered for sale and you put a date on which that should occur, and you expedite the processes under FLIPMA, you're slowing down or not slowing down, you're limiting the opportunity for public engagement. And the comment, I think we may have already said this today, if not, we've said it before, but you only have these public lands once. Right? We got them one time. The second we sell them for development, that's it. They're gone. Now, maybe it's the right thing to do. Maybe there are parcels we should be selling for development. But we need to make darn sure that they're the right parcels in the right places, that we're getting the right return, the right value for it, and that the public is engaged every step of the way, because it's public land, like it's our land, right? Like, so the idea that you can slip in an amendment like this that accelerates this process for tens of thousands of acres and mandates that they be at least offered for sale by a date certain, like, that's the part that just feels wrong to me. It's really shady to me. Like, do it through the right processes, engage the public. It might take a little longer. And I recognize also some of these things, there are other standalone bills that have been introduced in prior Congresses to try and accomplish these land sales and transfers. And maybe there was a frustration that those bills hadn't moved. And so they're trying to package it into this must-pass thing and thinking, oh, it can be a revenue generator. But I think that's short-sighted and again, cuts the public out of it. And my fear is that if this happens, then you're going to see other people in other places say, well, if we can do it for Clark County and we can do it around Reno and we can do it around St. George, then why can't we do it around Jackson Hole or Big Sky or Breckenridge, or like, pick your landlocked, public land surrounded community with high housing demand, pick that place. And why can't we then do this end around process, under the cover of darkness while everybody's asleep to force this in? So that bothers me. And then the other part that bothered me about this was that, like we've already talked about, that it was diverting the money that would go back into public lands and that management and diverting it to the Treasury. And so mine's really, my beef with this is really from a process standpoint, because I don't know enough about the acres on the ground to know whether they should be sold or not.
Well,
right?
It's fascinating because they're apples and oranges. They're totally different from one another. So, and it makes you wonder a little bit, at least it makes me wonder whether or not there is a little bit of, bright, shiny object in some of these things. So, for example, Pershing County, you got 356,000 acres identified in that county. It's confusing for us. So if it's confusing for you, that you should, that's okay. So when you look at some of these proposed lands and the proposed areas where these things would occur, these transfers, one thing is certain. It's certain that you have areas that are very dissimilar areas. There are areas that are around Clark County. There are areas around Lake Tahoe. These are areas where you can see that where you're going to make the argument. These are not, these are some of them are going to be affordable housing stuff like Clark County. Around Lake Tahoe, who knows? St. George. Well, St. George versus Pershing County, Nevada, these are not the same types of properties. Some of these properties are very high value properties around Lake Tahoe. Some of them, the middle of the desert, BLM land in Pershing County, Nevada, it just simply isn't. Now, that said, there's different values here, right, for the hunter. Some might argue that an area that's more rural is more valuable for hunting and fishing versus the stuff that's closer to a town. And I think it's really hard to say that that's the case without actually looking at each individual parcel, which is why this process is so important. If this goes through in the reconciliation, it might be right, but at the same time, it might not, because it's just hard to do the analysis on it because you're having to do the analysis on the fly. It's tough.
Well, and also here's the other thing. It's squishy. Like the math in here is squishy. I can't tell you how many acres are potentially offered for sale through this bill. The reporting was about 11,000, and we talked about that earlier, some of the reporting. But I'm not sure that reporting actually matches up. I think that reporting is taking direct quotes from some of the sponsors of this amendment, saying that's what it is. But just in Utah alone, it's about 8,000. That you can pretty easily find, about 8,000. The Nevada piece is a lot harder to find because you're pulling from several resource management plans. You're pulling from this RMP in Pershing County that identifies 300 and some odd thousand acres that could be suitable for disposal, but the proposal is more like a land exchange.
Yeah.
So we don't know if those would actually be sold. And then there's other squishy language in here that says the acres that are suitable for disposal, they should be offered. But then the secretary should also see if there are any other acres that should be offered for sale. So we don't actually know what the total number of acres is that this bill is talking about. So it's tricky.
It's tricky, and it's moving pretty fast. It makes me a little bit uncomfortable. The last thing I would say is, like, here's, again, one of the issues that I'm not sure we've had enough time to look at. And so I
just got a text in real time, by the way, from somebody.
Oh, what's it say?
And the text in real time says they think we're talking about combined maybe up to 700,000 acres.
Well, that's a lot of acres. That's a lot more than 11,000. 700,000, 11,000 are different numbers, just so we're clear.
Yeah, so we're seeing 11,000. I mean, I don't know. Here's the thing. That's why it's so unclear. I have numbers. We've seen 11,000. I've got numbers. I've seen somebody say 40,000. I've seen somebody say 70,000. Now I'm seeing somebody say a combined 700,000. It's all over the board. And I guess the point of saying that and emphasizing that is that's another reason why you shouldn't be slipping something like this in the middle of the night.
Yeah. So let me tell you what happened in Colorado, just so we're, can think about how this affects hunters and sportsmen and people who, live close to these urban areas. In Colorado, if you live on the Front Range, you can't use public lands for recreational shooting anymore. And so that was a decision that got made as the municipalities grew. They just banned it. Now,
hang on. You're saying that's state lands, right?
No, I'm talking about the forest. You can't recreational shoot on federal lands along the Front Range, but there was an agreement that was made with the administrative agency, and the agreement that was made was that that would only go into place. So the bans if the federal agency provided or worked with the local governments to make sure that there was a improved shooting range within those sections that they closed off to access for public shooting. And so that's an example of how it took a lot of time to get that agreement to require that there be a shooting range within X number of miles of these areas that they closed down. But just realize that that's a real thing right now. Shooting on public lands, on federal lands, that's something that's an approved and even encouraged use of those lands. And so when you lose that, when it becomes something else, you have to go find someplace else to sight that rifle in. And personally, I love it when people build shooting ranges. That's a great thing. But at the same time, that needs to be, again, that actually needs to be discussed. That needs to be part of this thought of if we're going to dispose of lands that belong to everybody that are close, well, what are those uses that are multiple uses that we no longer have access to anymore? And how do we provide the public that same opportunity? Because once those things are gone, they're gone.
So here's the deal. We can beat this thing to death here. I'm going to move on. I'm going to move us on, but I'm going to end it with this. This passed House committee. Like this bill is out of House Natural Resources, which means it now goes to the whole House. Right? So now's the time. Like this is the time. If you're concerned about this process, if you're concerned about having an amendment like this that potentially sells off, we could say tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands. Now that range is so big, but it's so confusing that you don't know if it's tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of acres at stake here. If you're opposed to that, now's the time to speak up and send notes in, make phone calls, get into your elected representatives, let them know that this isn't okay. There's still time to strip this out of a final bill. Like this isn't a done deal yet. There's still time to strip this out of a final bill. And recognize that there could be lands that could be appropriate to sell. We as the public deserve a chance to participate in that process and decide what those lands are. You know, these are national public lands. These are everybody's public lands. And once they're gone for good. So now's the time to speak up. Like it's here, it's happening. The thing that we said last week that could happen, unfortunately, is now happening. And it's time to speak up if you don't want to see those lands sold in this way. If you don't want to see a process done this way, if you have problems with using the cover of darkness to push through an agenda as opposed to an open, transparent public process that FLTMA envisioned, like now's the time. Those are my comments. Nephi, you got anything else before I move on?
A lot. This is a really challenging issue. I haven't used that terminology in a long time, but this is a challenging one. This is one that's requires attention and requires thoughtfulness because the momentum, I don't know that there's momentum behind this idea. So I was about to say like this has momentum right now. It doesn't have momentum. It has opportunity. I don't think it has momentum. But the opportunity is real. So for the folks that are looking to, have been looking for this opportunity for a long time, the issue is that there's enough distraction going on. There's enough other things going on. There's enough demand going on to pass this bill, the reconciliation package, that it creates an opportunity. It creates an opportunity to attach what ultimately is an earmark sort of thing. It's a priority for a few, not a priority for many. It creates a moment where you can attach that to this larger budget reconciliation and potentially move it through because there's so much going on. There's so much to be distracted by. So if this did get this discussion, this thought process got more attention, I don't know that it moves. That's what makes this so critical right now, because it's Congress, our process, it was designed to be slow and clunky, and that frustrates a lot of people. But it was designed to encourage discussion. It was designed to encourage compromise. So when you have these tools that fast track something and push it through in order to avoid, it getting, drugged down in the muck, if you will, of discussion, there's peril in that. It's one of the reasons that as much as folks, some people want to get rid of the filibuster, I certainly don't want to see it go anywhere, because I think the intent of our government was that all these things be thoroughly vetted before something of consequence move forward. And, I have concerns about the amount of discussion that's going on this one. And I'm not weighing in and telling you how to feel about it. I'm just saying that we probably ought to make sure that we really understand it. And I think I'm not sure that a whole lot of people do. I think if you'd ask, it might be only the people that listen to our podcast that have any idea that anything at all is happening.
Yeah, and when people like you and I, who do this for a living, like this is the stuff we do, this type of policy and work, stuff we do. And I'm reading through this and I've been scratching my head ever since I saw it, trying to figure out how many acres are really involved here? What does this really mean? And I can't figure it out. That's not good policy. Right? If the public doesn't know what the policy truly says, that's not good policy.
Well, the other thing is that you got to be careful of what precedent we allow to get set here. And to me, that's kind of a bigger issue, is the issue of precedent. What are we allowing here, and what does that make okay next time? So if we're going to dispose of lands this way, if we're going to take a process where we're going to use budget reconciliation to do something that's very significant like this, it's kind of this is irreversible. I don't know. I'm not the person who I question it. I want to make sure that, if we're doing stuff we can't undo, I think that actually requires more discussion than anything else.
It's a higher bar. Like, there are things in this reconciliation package that people may or may not like, right? And most of the things, when they pass, a future Congress could come in and undo it. Like, they're policy related,
you can
revenue
fix laws,
generating
you
things.
can change rules and regs, you can revisit them. You can't sell a bunch of federal land to private interests and then get it back.
Right. I mean, I suppose you could use eminent domain, but that's a totally different topic, and probably not actually in most of those instances. Yeah, once it's gone, it's gone, and perhaps in that instance, it should be held to a higher bar, and maybe it might take a longer process than some other things might take, and maybe that's okay, and that's maybe what Congress intended when they drafted FLTMA in the first place and laid out a process for selling the federal estate, and also laid out a purpose saying it's the policy of the federal government to actually not sell the federal estate, except in very limited circumstances. And so then if you're going to do it, you need to be diligent, thorough, thoughtful, transparent, include the public at every step of the way. I think the point you made, that might be the best point I've heard yet on it. And I hate to give you that compliment, Nephi, but I'm gonna.
I appreciate it, Dave.
I think
it's
when
been a
you
long
when
day.
you say,
I could use a compliment from you.
But when you say, I know it means nothing to you if I give a compliment, but when you say that this can't be undone, like, that's an important message. You can undo, if you change royalty rates on oil and gas development from 16 and 2/3% to 12.5% or whatever the proposal is, right? A future Congress can come in and undo that.
Yeah.
When you cut funding to an agency because you're trying to pay for some other program, a future Congress can come in and change that. When you sell lands and build a big building on it, you can't undo that. It's done. You got one shot at it.
Yeah.
So it's a great point you make, and I think a perfect way to wrap a bow around this discussion.
Well, it was certainly a good time. What great fun! And this is our new podcast, by the way, for everybody that doesn't know. The old podcast is dead. This is the new Your Mountain podcast.
Which is what?
I don't know. It's just, remember, the last one was going to be our last podcast ever.
Yeah.
So
then a week later we do one.
We've turned over a new leaf. This is a much more serious and thoughtful Your Mountain podcast.
Let me transition. Speaking of serious and thoughtful,
okay. Let's go.
We like to talk about hunting and so forth on occasion. It feels like we've spent a lot of time in the past several talking about all these federal processes and the public lands issues and so forth.
There's some interesting hunting news going on. Yep.
So
everybody should be applying for Area 7 in Wyoming.
No. What in the world? Why would you do that?
Because I don't hunt there.
I don't know anybody that does. You don't draw there. It's not that you don't hunt there. It's that you don't draw there.
I'm not putting in there. But my odds everywhere else are better if you're all putting in Area 7. So do it.
It kind of hurts me a little bit as a guy that periodically draws that tag.
Mm-hmm.
But no, what I was actually going to talk about is that the Fish and Wildlife Service in the last week or so proposed expanding hunting and fishing opportunities on about 87,000 acres of National Wildlife Refuge System lands, which was really what they'd say is they're creating 42 new opportunities at 16 refuges and one fish hatchery. Here's the reason I want to mention that. First of all, I think it's great anytime there's increased opportunity to hunt or fish. If the service or Interior expands hunting or fishing opportunities at refuges, it has to be consistent with the established purpose of the refuge. So you're not going in with these refuges. You don't automatically get to hunt them, right? Or hunt on them. You have to show that allowing hunting would not be inconsistent with the established purposes of the refuge. And so it's kind of cool to see that they're able to do this and say these opportunities wouldn't conflict with the intended purposes of these refuges. I do chuckle every time I see these. I'm just going to say this part out loud because it's hilarious to me. We saw this both with the Biden administration and the last Trump administration, and now we're seeing it again. Remember when we were seeing opening up opportunities on 2 million acres of Fish and Wildlife Service lands? Well, what does that actually mean? It doesn't mean that there were 2 million acres of lands that you couldn't hunt on before that you can all of a sudden hunt on. Just so like this, it doesn't mean that there were 87,000 acres that you couldn't hunt on that now you all of a sudden could. You may have been able to hunt.
You can just you can hunt squirrels now.
Yeah, let's just pick refuge, like the Red River Refuge. Let's just make one up, right? The Red River Refuge.
There was no squirrel hunting.
There was no squirrel. They'd let you hunt ducks and geese.
No squirrels.
But no squirrels. And I say it's 10,000 acres, a 10,000 acre refuge. And you could hunt all of these other species, but not squirrels. Well, now you can hunt squirrels, so they're going to say 10,000 new acres of opportunity. It's squishy math. That's all I'm saying.
That's pretty nice of them to do that. But here's
but it is cool to do that. I always chuckle at the squishy.
Yeah,
math.
it is. The other thing that I think is interesting is it's something to pay attention to. I think it's kind of I've mentioned this podcast a couple times, the bright shiny object. And so the bright shiny object, right? That's the thing you hold up and you wave around while you're doing something here with your other hand. It's the magic trick. It's the distraction while you're working on the thing behind the scenes that you don't want people to notice. And so sometimes these bright shiny objects, I think this is funny because when you see some of the stuff going on, like these transfers that could negatively affect opportunities, you'll often see these bright shiny objects waved around. And the last administration did the same thing with the refuges. It's like they wave around and they hold up a big number of acres and they say, "Hey, we're doing this," because they realize that on the other hand, there's some stuff that may really make sportsmen angry that they're kind of doing over here with the other hand, and so this is your distraction. And so I wonder whether or not some of these things aren't related to each other, where like, oh yeah, we're working on some other stuff that we know we're gonna have pushback on, so let's pull up something flashy and get people to look at it. And you know what? Maybe it's not like I'll take the flash sometimes. You'll take what you're getting instead. But I do think I would advise everyone, anytime you see something like this, try and figure out what the other hand is doing. Look at the bright shiny object and say, okay, what else is going on right now that I should be looking for? So it's just a cautionary a cautionary statement.
Yeah, I think that's pretty spot on, Nephi, and there are a lot of other things going on, and I suspect there are some things that are going to ruffle the feathers of some hunters and anglers in places when they start rolling out. Don't know what they're going to be yet. We'll kind of see. Maybe there'll be some other
but I think
other good stuff too.
The most important thing you could do right now is we're getting to the end of a lot of state legislative sessions, and I had somebody ask me this, and it's the most important advice I think we could give our listeners right now would be this. There's a lot of people that when the political season starts to wind down, they think that they can take a breath, and you really can't. This is actually the season of opportunity, because when it's the opportunity now to make the difference. If you're waiting until now to talk to a lawmaker for the first time, do it. but realize that you're probably behind the eight ball, because when they start working on some of these proposals and it comes to light, they've typically already been having a lot of meetings behind the scenes, and they've been talking to people. And there are staff in these offices that have already been convinced, and they already have an idea of the thing that they're going to try and convince their boss that they should do, and the thing that they're going to try and carry forward. And so if you haven't engaged with people before this stuff happens, you don't have a working relationship, you've never reached out, you're behind the eight ball. So how do you keep from having that happen? Well, you keep from having that happen by reaching out today. Even if you don't know what the exact proposal is today, even if you don't know exactly what you think the good and the bad is today, if you call your elected representative's office and go meet the staffer or introduce yourself or have coffee or whatever it might be, start building a relationship. I will tell you that having that relationship before something comes out, it exponentially increases your effectiveness when you see the proposal that you don't like. Because if you don't have a relationship of trust already, if that elected official or that staffer doesn't think that you are interested in what they're doing, what they care about beforehand, you're going to be much less effective when you have to visit with them about what you care about today. So I would say to you, if you even, maybe this doesn't bother you right now, like one way or the other, maybe you like it, maybe you don't, but start developing a relationship with the staff, with the elected official, with those decision makers, where you can talk to them and you can share with them, what you think is important, what your priorities are, who you are, because that will pay dividends when the chips are down and you are trying to ask them to vote in a certain way. If you already have the relationship, it gets much, much easier to do that. So now I'll get off my soapbox.
No, that's good advice. That's good advice. It kind of triggered a thought in me too, kind of going back to our lands discussion. And like, okay, what are our next steps? How do I get involved? We had somebody that reached out and said, and maybe this is a question for you, Nephi. I'll give a thought too, but I had somebody that reached out and said, hey, I've tried connecting with my representative's office, and I can't even get a staffer to pick up the phone and take my call or call me back. And what do I do? Like, what advice do you give somebody in that situation? I'm going to say one thing and then I'll kick it to you, because I think there's another way to do this too. And we probably should have mentioned it, is if you are a member of a conservation organization, hunting organization, you're a member of one of those, you can reach out there and say, this is an important issue to me, and I hope that you'll take it forward. Because remember, one of the reasons you're a member is they have the people that are building relationships with those folks as well, and they can help convey your message. And sometimes if you build a relationship with that organization, they can bring you into that conversation with you. They do these things sometimes called fly-ins. Organization will do these things called fly-ins in DC, where they'll just bring members and organize meetings on the Hill with representatives of Congress, for example. They do it in state too, state level fly-ins with representatives at the state level to connect constituents with their representatives. So they're not just hearing from the C3 organizations, they're hearing from the people. So one of the things you could do is reach out to one of those organizations you support that you might be a member of and say, this is an important issue to me. What are you doing about it? And how can I be involved? And they might help you plug into, and maybe they'll even help connect you, facilitate a connection to somebody that they have a relationship with to help you make that connection. But Nephi, I wonder if you have any thoughts, because that is an email we got from somebody that said, I'm trying to take your advice on establishing a relationship, and I can't get somebody to return a call.
A couple thoughts. So the first of all is, if you belong to Front Country Hunters and Anglers, which FCHA, Dave and I's the Your Mountain group, which is even better if you actually say the acronym rather than spelling it out. But at FCHA, we at FCHA, we recognize the importance of having quality lobbyists. And so here's the thing. Whether you belong to our organization or somebody else's, you're right. There's a bunch of individuals who, if these larger reputable organizations, they have people whose job it is to make these relationships. And so that's why you join these organizations. Because if you join the organization, and here's the thing, if you join the organization, you better make sure that you're okay with where they're headed. You better make sure that you're weighing in with the leadership of the organization, or else you're just putting your money into somebody else's priorities. But reach out to them and join the organization and ask them to carry your message, because they've probably been building these relationships. It's something that Dave and I both, working on real jobs, like that we do all the time. We work on building relationships with elected officials so that we can weigh in on these things because they're important. So about if you're not getting a call back, I'm going to vent right now. I actually called a elected official's office recently, and and that's actually the second time that it's happened, and it's at the same level of elected official, and we're talking about, it's not the president of the United States, but it's high level elected officials, and you get voicemail when you call these officials. It absolutely drives me nuts. And this official, I called the office and I asked for a specific staffer, and you're never going to believe this, Dave. I asked for a staffer by name. I'm like, hey, can you transfer me to that phone? And they said, oh, I'm sorry. We have a new policy. I'm not allowed to transfer you to individual staff. I said, what? He said, yeah, you can leave an email, but I can't transfer that person. And I literally said the person's name. I was like, you can't transfer me to basically Dave Johnson. She's like, nope. And I said, is his extension still ABCDE? She's like, yes. It's like, well, I'm going to just hang up and call that extension. But I'm seeing a disturbing trend, which is literally in elected offices. I am seeing a trend where they are trying to make it harder to get rid of, to visit with policy advisors. And that happened in, it's not just in one state. I've seen it in multiple states where literally it's getting more difficult to talk to, and they're trying to shield people from it using technology. So here's my ask. If you're an elected official, cut that crap out. That's exactly what you shouldn't be doing. The whole reason that you have staff to take these calls from the public. And if you're hiding your staff behind a switchboard so they don't have to talk to people, you're wasting your money, because you hired these people. And that's why staffers have jobs. Their job is to listen to Joe Public. And then if Joe Public says A, B, C, D, and E are true, your staff's whole job is to find out whether Joe Public is right or not, to provide a briefing paper to you about what Joe Public said and where Joe Public is right and where Joe Public is wrong. And if your staff are not interacting with the public, get rid of your staff. Get new staff. If your staff as an elected official is incapable of representing you with your constituency, you need new staff. And I mean, that's a reality, because that is their job. Their job is to make sure that you don't get surprised. If you're an elected official, the worst thing that could happen to you, and we saw this, Dave, didn't we, during the elections, where you had elected officials who, quote unquote, took a position and they had no idea what that position entailed. And then they got hammered in the press because their staff didn't do their homework. If your staff, you find a way to answer that phone. And if you're an elected official, you demand that staffer answer the phone. And if you're Joe Public, find a way to get through. And if the staffer isn't willing to answer the phone call, go up the chain of command and call the chief of staff. Start working your way up. And if you can't talk to the policy advisor who's in charge of the area that you care about, the area that's important to you, you go to the next level up and you tell them that the service that you're being provided really isn't measuring up to what you expected. Don't be mean. Don't yell at somebody, but say, like, hey, you know what? I really care about this natural resources issue. It's important to me. I tried to call the natural resources staff and I'm just not hearing from people, and I'm a little bit concerned. They'll only screw that up once, and then they'll start answering people's phone calls. But if you have staff at elected officials' offices who are burying emails because they don't want to answer those emails, that person doesn't belong in public service.
I hope that's a helpful answer to the listener, maybe other listeners that have experienced the same thing. I thought it was an interesting email that we got.
Did I go too far, Dave? Do I need to edit this too?
No, I mean that's up to you, man. You're the one that said it.
No, man, it's true.
Not me. But it's true.
true.
I mean, you and I have been in those jobs. We know, like, not every phone call you get is a phone call you want to answer, but you answer it anyway.
We had a process, and this is crazy to me because we both worked for the same elected official, the world's greatest governor,
That's right.
Matthew H. Meade. But we had you remember our process? Every constituent that called, we did what we called the blue sheet.
The blue sheet. Oh man.
Anybody that called or emailed,
called or wrote,
it didn't matter. That sheet went to a staffer, and everyone got a response. Every individual got a response. Does it take time to do that? You bet it does.
I dreaded that when the stack was 6 inches high.
No, man.
Like, oh my gosh.
But
you know what?
You called them or you emailed.
Public.
Yeah,
exactly.
You responded. And here's the thing that troubles me, and I've seen this in multiple high-level offices now, where there is no accountability for returning that, where individuals and that's the funny part. Like, it's bizarre to me that I would call an office that I know has, let's just say, 10 people working at that office, and you would literally have no one that's able to answer a phone out of that staff, that you can't get a hold of somebody for real or get a response. I don't know about you, man, but if it were my dollars, I'd be wanting I'd be wanting better responses if it were me. If I were the boss and I knew that, we talked about political economy on our last podcast. And so I'm going to get back up on my soapbox now. Have you ever gotten off your soapbox? This has been an episode full of soapbox. This has been spicy. You've been spicy. The most important thing for an elected official to do, right, is it's political economy. The only thing that every person's got one vote, right? And your job is to try and gain that one vote. And anytime somebody calls your office and they have a bad experience where somebody doesn't at least try to make them happy, guess what you just lost? You lost the initiative to win that one vote. And so if you're a staffer working for an elected official, the most important thing for you, just remember that one person that called, you're trying, it's just customer service. You're trying to make that customer happy. Are you always going to be able to do it? No, but you better give it an honest effort, because it's like other stuff. Like, if you lose that vote, that person doesn't have another vote to give you. You can't, they're not going to parse
like land. It's like land. Once it's gone, it's gone.
Once it's gone, it's gone. Once they move on and they decide you're no longer their candidate, you're no longer their representative, that it needs to be somebody else, you're likely never getting them back. So you better listen, and you better try and honestly try and address their concerns. It literally is your job, and so that's just it's my take on public service.
Well, I hope that helps. You know what? This makes me think of a new segment that we could have.
Is it the soapbox? What is it?
No, it doesn't even, we have to come up with a name for it.
Oh,
but,
good.
A lot of podcasts do the answering listeners' questions. Mm-hmm. We never really do that. But when something like that, which I think could apply to so many people that want to know, how do I get engaged? What do I do when I'm not hearing from somebody? Those types of questions. Maybe I'll start bringing a question a week, or a couple questions a week. That's funny. Every time we record, whether it's once a week or once a month, or once in 26. Maybe I'll bring a couple of those questions. So shoot them our way. If you got some of those types of questions, yourmountain@itsyourmountain.com. Send them to us. We'll see what we can do. I'm always trying to respond through email, but maybe we respond through the airwaves. I don't know what this segment's called. Give us a suggestion for that too. What should we call it if we do this? But
Yeah. So here's a final suggestion for the guy that
Yeah.
didn't hear from his elected official. So sometimes elected officials have two different kinds of staff. There's the staff who are working at their office, and then they almost always also have a campaign group. Send their campaign director an email. Tell them you haven't heard from him. And I bet you get a call.
It's probably right. And if they don't have that, I'm reticent to say this part, but I'm going to say this part anyway. No elected official wants to see their name in the paper for not responding to constituents. Like, if you try all these avenues and you're still not getting a response, maybe alert your local newspaper. Say, hey, I'm having some problem getting a hold of this office. They're not responding to anything. Your local newspaper might be interested in hearing that. Yeah. And that's the thing that maybe an elected official hates worse than finding out that their staff isn't responding to emails is finding that out through the media.
Yeah, it's finding out from somebody that like, it says right here that I don't respond to emails. What's going on?
I couldn't imagine a worse conversation as a staffer to have with one's elected official boss than that one.
Well, this has been a good time.
Yeah.
So for all of you who work for an elected official and had to listen to this, I'm really sorry. I'm sure you're not part of the problem.
And I know there's a lot of you out there. So I know this was a little bit of a spicy one. It was a little bit of a long one. And it maybe we didn't have all the substance we wanted on the particulars of the proposal, but there, as you know, there's a reason why. It's because it's really kind of hard to figure out the specific acres involved here. So I appreciate everybody tuning in. I'm hoping that here pretty soon we'll be talking about other things than public land sales or sell-offs, and that we can talk about some other stuff. We've got some great topics in the inbox, by the way, that are way more in the lane of directly involving hunting and fishing. Although the existence of public lands kind of directly impacts hunting and fishing at the highest level as well. So keep those thoughts coming. And you look like you have another thought.
My sources say that Area 7 is the best spot in the state this year, everybody. Don't put in for any other areas.
I'm telling you, if you're a non-resident, you're too late. I think you already had to apply, so you're toast.
What antelope area are we telling people? Huh? You can still apply for deer and antelope.
Not as a non-resident.
Oh, I didn't know. When is that? I thought it was June 2nd was the deadline.
I thought that was just for residents.
Well, I don't know, Dave. I've never applied as a non-resident.
Well, I guess I haven't either, but I just thought non-resident and resident application deadlines were different days.
Well, it looks like we're going to have to find out.
Well,
you missed it, everyone. You're not going to be hunting in Wyoming this year. Sorry.
Beautiful. I'm going to get the last thing I'll say. I am anticipating a significant refund coming here in the next day or two, because Wyoming is going to have its draw for moose, bighorn sheep, and mountain goat, of which I applied for all and gave the department my no interest loan. And I fully anticipate that money will be refunded to me very soon when I learn that I don't draw any of those tags.
I got bad news, Dave.
What?
It's May 31st for deer and antelope for non-residents.
Oh, son of a gun. Oh, but not for elk. That's passed.
No, elk is passed. And for those of you who are looking to figure out where Dave hunts deer and antelope at, I don't usually respond to emails, but I'm willing to in this case. Go ahead and email care of Nephi Cole at yourmountain.com.
At bedazzledunderwear.nephi.com. Bro country.
It's been a good time, Dave. I seriously enjoy, I look forward to doing podcasts. For those that don't know, we don't monetize these because we're dumb. But at the same time, it's like the only time we get together and we really just get to see each other and talk. And I really value it, Dave. I value it very much.
I do as well. And we are about a month out from having done this for 8 years.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah.
We should sell our We should sell our catalog. Do you know what that means? I don't.
I don't
I'm
either.
pretty sure.
Yeah. We're like Bob Dylan of podcasting. We're going to sell our catalog for just a.
We could remaster all of our
boatload
old
of cash.
podcasts.
Yeah. We'll remaster them into 8 tracks.
What if we did
sell
them
8 tracks?
What if we did them like? What if we offered them as a hard drive? We could put all of them on a hard drive. If we could find one and figure out how to hook it up to a computer and get all the old ones back off the internet.
I'm sure. I mean, I'm sure we could
sell
do that. But who would want to buy it when they can just go download it for free on the internet?
We could auction it. Does that make it worth more?
I don't know what we can do. We need to be more creative at how you monetize this. If anybody, here's one. If anybody has ideas on how we can make any money on this freaking thing,
We're gonna sell FCHA T-shirts. That's a by the way, nobody
Patent
else
pending.
can. You
Trademark
can't put.
pending.
Yep, because we have mentioned it now. Dave is my attorney, by the way. Don't mess with me because he's actually not a terrible attorney, even if I typically tell people he is in person. That's not true.
you tell them that in person and in writing and behind this. And
But I'm
text
telling you
messages
right
and-
now, the FCHA is legit. Don't touch our T-shirts.
Yeah, we're gonna make those. Hey, I got to run.
All right,
I just looked at the time. I got to run.
Dave. I'll see you.
You
I
gotta
gotta
run.
I gotta go too.
Yeah. All right.
See you
Thank
later,
you, everybody, for listening. Really appreciate it. And as always, remember, life is about experiences. So go have one.